다 가장 다지 칭찬을 말해가로 시질로도 현비 내기 왕기 현비 내기 왕기 탐제지 탐제 장니 세위매 세자와 주민은 주어 권한 인배 시질로도 현비 내기 왕기 탐제 장니 와서 내디 세위매 세자와 주민은 주어 권한 인배 덤비순 타다 이제 소소를 때네 아니다 가르소로 냥아래 때와 토비 타수 주와 타수 주로 대체서 지금 말아
So then the end of that section before the example is that surely these are simply medicines to remove all views influenced by the sickness of wrong thinking or wrong views. Therefore, everything the teacher said is a means to attain nirvana, taking into consideration the individual trainees or disciples.
Oh, yeah. 이제 소소라 때네 취지 진역가자와 땡전이라 담기도 태양양은 다지 시주민제 처럼에 소하나시 전에 땜배 송 탐제 아니 양알에 대와 주어오기 다소 마소와지 요 말이 전에다 태양양은 다지 취지 진역가자와 땡전이라 담되죠 태양양은 다지 시주민제 처럼에 전에다 좀 된대지 강수부터 양알에 대와 다소 마주와지 요 말이 소하자
There's a verse, I think, in the in the praise to dependent origination, which says that therefore, and referring to the teaching on dependent origination, there's nothing that you, O sage, have taught that is not intended as a method to lead various forms of beings into the state of nirvana.
Oh, yeah. 이원이 오래다 배나 비스미 여라 제대로부터 총 이원이 내지 두르 첨부 지도 줄 순반이 이다도 주위 아니 배된 데와 따로
So the analogy or illustration of this appears in the commentary, and it shows the meaning. It connects the example with the meaning in the commentary. Also, that's Chandrakirti's commentary, and it says that there were three brothers, and one of them was a monk. The second one was had been born as a powerful yaksha spirit, and the third was a preta or hungry ghost.
다시와 태권한이 또바란 배바담바니 양다토나 내조라 주사토나 상조디 대진난다 삼바라 개바다도 너저지 다 여바다 멤버 소지 담바디라 라신이 여바당 가서 가냐나 가수를 여바다 멤버 소 담바들 예매지 타다도 담바 타녀도 여바당 아니 가서래 여바다 매바 소지 담바딜라 예매자야나 라시지 아니 타녀도 여바당 아니 라시지 매바 소지 아니 타라도 담바라 전다바 담바인라 전다바 담바인라 아니 전다바 태양 지대는 대위 시기 양다바 통나 전다바 태양 지대는 대위 시기 양다바 태양 내조 타바 톨라스 양다 통나 내조라스 전다바 담바이나 전다바 내루타도 대체제 태양 아니 지대는 대위 시기가나 파베 아니 무슨 야 돈이 되면 무슨 양다바 통나 아니 내조 타바 톨라스 지대미 공주당 최섬지 셰러지 주사 토나야 상조대에서다 주사 토나 상조대에서 가나 뒤원도 아니 다 가르쳐서는 저런 게 내가 소지되는 대회 이 시기 양다바 통명하로 아니 저런 게 내서 직된 비 공주지 들어와 저런 게 내가 저 공주당 소람지 내가 저 아니 대삼지 셰러지 주세 통나 아니 상조대 주세 통나 상조대
So the next verse then shows is an instruction on that one should make effort to understanding reality, and that's given in the verse. If one sees that which is real, one will attain the highest state. If one sees a little bit of it, one will go to a state which is better, and therefore the wise, those who are intelligent, always develop the understanding, the intellect, which enables them to understand the internal state of things. They always think about that which is internal. And so the commentary on this explains that these teachings on things existing, things not existing, etc., and we can read that in different ways, but here we could say that things conventionally exist, but they don't exist by means of any kind of intrinsic nature, have any kind of intrinsic nature. So these instructions are designed to enable us to become free from the extremes of existence and non-existence. The extreme of existence meaning that things exist by means of their own intrinsic nature. The extreme of non-existence being that things are totally non-existent, or that karma and so forth don't exist, or functionality of conventional things is non-existent. And so all of these are the ultimate teaching, or teaching on the ultimate. And that ultimate is something which is, when it is correctly seen by a transcendental gnosis, then one obtains the highest state of liberation, the supreme condition of liberation. So that's referring then at the end, from the point that one achieves the path of seeing, that's when the initial moment of a direct perception of emptiness occurs, and that's what's referred to as here as this transcendental gnosis, which correctly sees the ultimate, that knowledge of emptiness. And then likewise, by means of the wisdom which arises out of meditation, as well as the wisdom that arises out of hearing the teachings, thinking about the teachings. These are worldly forms of knowledge or wisdom. Those, if one sees reality, the ultimate, a little bit by means of those those three kinds of wisdoms, then one goes to a better state. One improves oneself in that way. And here then where it says the wisdom that arises from meditation, that refers especially to the path of preparation, where one is, particularly to the path of preparation, where one is developing within oneself a understanding of emptiness through inference initially, through habituating oneself to one's understanding of emptiness that's already been established by inference and so forth. And then where it says the wisdoms that arise from hearing the teachings and thinking about the teachings, that then refers to, especially on the path of preparation, where one is hearing instructions on emptiness, and then when one is thinking about them, analytically investigating them through using that kind of wisdom to establish emptiness correctly, then those kinds of wisdoms as well enable one to see the ultimate to a certain extent, and by means of that one goes to a better, becomes improved or better.
Oh yeah. 아니 가서 강그지 대다인 바 티체를 나 초조그 내가서 가서 사람이 내가 퇴삼 아니 권 지대미 공중 저런 거 내가 공중 파바에 내가서 아니 지대는 대비 이些대다 토바주와 대다인 바 티체를 아니 난게 다 가사다고 동반이 삼바라 캐외 다도 노래 제바 차오 세데 대제 난다 삼바라 캐외 다도 노래 제 세네.
So thus, the last part of that verse is that therefore, by reflecting upon that which is internal of oneself, the wise person always generates within themselves intelligence. The last two lines of that could say that, could be translated like that. And so therefore, because that is the case, someone who is here, the internal, could be literally translated as internal self, but refers to someone who is investigating themselves, their internal nature, and thinks about emptiness, the internal nature of oneself. Then, by becoming skilled and learned in that, then one ought to constantly develop one's intelligence with respect to that.
Oh yeah, Bena Javi Porando Kumbo Che Mimbe, Kumbo Che Mimbe, Dundu Pewa Shindo.
So the example that's given in the commentary for that is a thief was in a king's palace, and he was accosted by an immoral woman. And
내가 냥대 대와 동반이라 안에 공부지 겁나 안에 난댕이 뭐 냥대 돈이 받더라 뭐다 아니 대시에 조양 가지 마주의 군전 이시가라 당월들라 가르에서 대시에와 가대디 냥한대와 마주자 깨와 현도 빼매매 녀와 덮줄래시노 세리 어디기 아니 가대 태권한이 또 봐라 공부 재미없고네 아니 땡중기 아니 가서 덴비저와 타삼자단 차위 덴비저와 탑자단 차위 태권한이 시베 가사 되기 가대 교원들라 아니 양할 때와 말도 와제지 이나양 교와 치마 게 아니 양바 가사 치게 양바 담바 담지 자치난 그들이로 치마를 깨 저와 치마 깨 아니 가서래 샘두지 치치두지다 난기 엠바 다 텐데를 담바라 때네 깨 엠바 담바 잠기 배바 매바라 내가 토바를 주대 냐데 내가 토대 중국의 왕기 아니 그 가서 미국에 내 체외 아니 남이 증거지래라 남이 증거지래 나시래 제 중국의 체외 깨는 용주지래 신도 깨는 용주지 남이 증거지래 신도
So then the next topic is that if one habituates oneself to that, to the ultimate, then one is definitely able to achieve nirvana. And this has the principle, the main topic is explained first. And then next comes the reason why some who have understood reality have not immediately achieved liberation. So the first of these is given in verse 197, where it says that even if one, through knowing reality, even if one does not attain nirvana, one will certainly gain it effortlessly, without effort, in a later life, as it is with actions or karma. Even if one does not attain nirvana in this life, by knowing the reality of dependent origination, free from the extremes of elaboration, conceptual elaboration refers to the conceptually elaborating things as if they were real, superimposing the sense of existence being real that they don't actually possess. Through familiarity with the understanding of reality, one will certainly attain it effortlessly in a later life, merely by virtue of remaining in seclusion. Here, seclusion or in isolation can refer to some persons are able to remain in an isolated state and achieve this without some special effort entailed. It is like a karma performed out of confusion, the effect of which will be experienced upon taking rebirth.
Oh yeah. 내신 어제 남자들 담보 수시 대권하니 또 말아 배바를 미세지 아니 배고그래 배나 아미 대부 멤버스네 아니 되게 아니 사변 주바데 뒤신도야 아니 신도 토바나시래
So then what discerning or intelligent person would not strive to understand reality? It's like the following example. After you eat a ripe mango, if you plant its stone or pit, you'll get fruit later.
어디래 나한테 가서래 나디 제라 저와시라 그런데 그래서 조산제나 마중진 년대 남다 세바나 라산제지 이제니 때문에 봐라도 치세가나 안에 뒤에 가서 산제 지대도 맞춰봐 라산제 대다 안에 조산제나 맞춰봐 안에 년대 남다 아니 세바나 라산제지 이신이 이니 세바 서미트 레베션제 당하라 마되바 아니 랑 자중만도 쳐봐대 랑자지 자주 쳐야 당원도 쳐야 손mer.
So then next is cited a verse from the basic text on wisdom, the fundamental verses on the middle way by Master Nagarjuna, where it says that even when perfect Buddhas do not appear, when the Shravakas, the disciples, have become extinct, then the gnosis of the individual realizers, pratyeka Buddhas, can arise without them depending upon another. So this is referring to there are periods within the cycle of time, cosmic cycles, in which there are no Buddhas appearing. The Shravakas there are no more Shravakas in the world, arhats and so forth, and at that time like that, nevertheless, these pratyeka Buddhas or individual realizers are able to gain realization of the nature of reality without depending upon the instruction of someone else.
태권하니 아니 시베 아니 코알라 초양 가정 마저비 된자니 삼신바이 자완니 불러 주바 신도가 니나 양대 매매지 조단 초난 예바가 세대다 가디 태권하니 시와 도마 외장 아니 시발라 초와다 민나와 지신지 민나와의 지신나스 어떤이 시아망보여와 데스발라 초와 민나와 지신나스 아니 라라나 메지 삼바짬은 아니 삼바짬지 태권하는 시와 삼바짬지 제비 주지 민지 돈이 시와짬 제비 주지 말이 돈이 냥알 대비 주지 말이 대비 주지 민지 규제 망보 쳐봤고 현장 아니 규제 망보 규제 쳐봐 얘라 아니 태양 신도 아니 예바가오 삼신바의 차원에 군란 주바 신도 군서 대나 야 안데바주다.
So next comes the fact that although one is liberated by means of understanding reality, there's the reason why some people are not liberated, and this is given in verse 198, where here the commentary begins by saying, even though there are many people who understand reality, why is it that there don't seem to be very many people appearing who have actually achieved liberation from existence? And then the verse says that it's extremely rare for activities to be completed by thinking about them, whereas one sort of by wishes. And it's not the case that there's no such thing as nirvana, but it's very rare for people to apply themselves to it and to achieve liberation as a result of that. So that being the case, it says here that then the actual reply to the hypothetical or actual question about why it is that there's so few people that appear to have achieved liberation. The answer is that although sometimes they do appear, however, simply by thinking about the nature of reality, it's not sufficient. It doesn't serve as a sufficient cause for the result that one is seeking here. It's not enough just to think about, have some idea about reality, but it depends upon the concatenation of all of the causes and conditions, the collection of all of the causes and conditions that are necessary for the achievement of liberation, and that is extremely rare.
Oh yeah. 三旬八夜，讲完你归了心都知道，归完赛的天那一天不着，军在天那是啊，他说的，那那没去，当把你写完了，那么就300张就之后就700没去，之前错把国外人让，之前错把就国外，军在提前呐，天呐。 아니 삼신바나 사또바니 삼바 공바 태점기 레우 차와니 탑발 마세 꾼라 주바야 신도 꿰베 세데 삼신바이 차와니 꾼라 주바 신도 꿰베 산제지 담바 디나양 양대 천도냐와 매바 민기 네 양대 천도냐와 매바 민기 대단해 다 천도냐와 연애야 견사와 치견 그의 신예당 난게견 아니 오랑게 아니 도반이라서 가서는 양대 토바 쳐봐 그탑 수식이라 쳐봐 소 아니 규정 그 조신 아니 쳐봐 예봐 가와탕 세대 디단 디난 디안함 디나냐데 메시지 조단 초난 예봐 가 스타워티 치오마지 연구도
So then the continuation of that reply is that it is not the case that no one aspires to attain nirvana in the Buddha's teaching, but the causes and conditions, external conditions such as a virtuous friend or spiritual friend, and internal ones such as, here it says correct mental approach, but I would translate that as a correct attention, focusing one's mind upon correctly upon emptiness, correct attention to emptiness, very seldom combine and come together, which is why those who have achieved liberation, who are released from samsara, are extremely rare.
Oh yeah. 期间各位信念的哪个间出现一了切巴了，所以俺逐渐归出现切巴的，俺也把搞我提起人，俺卡说了。 양 대체를 좋아 세가라 아니 양대 토대 영어보다 영어비 주발에 좋아남 예바가와래
So the fact then again that these, although it is the case, it's not the case that there's nobody who hears the Buddha's teaching or who's residing within it and practicing it that doesn't strive to achieve nirvana. But even though that is the case, the external condition of having a virtuous friend who is able to explain this profound instruction to one correctly, and then the internal condition within oneself of having that kind of correct focus, mental attention, paying attention, focusing one's mind upon emptiness correctly, and all of the other internal conditions that need to be met. The combination of all of these causes and conditions and the conjunction of them, bringing them all together, is extremely difficult to obtain, and therefore those who have actually achieved liberation are difficult to find. It's rare to find them.
Oh yeah. 但你们你玩三年吧，当不太了。娱乐园的没多那对下一人没来的，咱们的你的。 아니 탐제자 세버를 좋아 많이 남으나 다 가데 뒤 안에 토마 매반에 안에 유른도 안에 관배 쇼바기 아니 니몸에 소데라 세버 여도 셰샤바데 세버 여바데 안에 지다는 게 셰나 세간 굉장히 관계가 그래서 지다는 게 셰나 네 가서래 지다랑 길라 유른보 lonje 나조 지세장 与人不龙卷那就去这样，基本期间前往密切性是两个与人不龙卷那就去这样，你的基本期间前往密切性，期间是那的结构问题多些个密切性，结构问题多些个开完那么是的。 shima den dira shi ge ga wa do shi wa ge kya wa nam ji yan de me ba tene lu de la cha bi de ja yu run de mine de yu run de mine de mine de ji xin de den jung ge zhe wa ta dang cha wa yu run de gong bi lam ting yi ji da den jung你那个这我他们连别这我他当朝有人都管别咱们听你记你们他们这俺那三百句话没人把的那么三百女的他把就过来是了现在旅乐园的没多呢底下有人没来的是俺咱们的你记他们这讲三百句话没人他们是的但就至于这我当这位按朝有人都管别咱们听你记你们他们这三百句话没有三百那边他就过来是呀
So then next comes an instruction that the mental afflictions definitely are, when is able, definitely able to extinguish them, to eliminate them. And this is given in verse 199. Someone might say, well, how can one be certain that there is an end to this multitude of mental afflictions which have continued to occur so long, beginninglessly? And the reply to that is, on hearing that the body lacks good qualities, attachment does not last long. Will not all these mental afflictions, end by means of this very path? When the intelligent person who knows how to think analytically, I'm sorry, yeah, okay. Hears that the body lacks good qualities and that its nature is to disintegrate no matter how long one has cared for it with all kinds of things, that the body is ungrateful and difficult to nurture, then their attachment to the body does not endure for long. Similarly, why should it not be possible to end all of the mental afflictions through the path that consists of meditating upon dependent origination, free from the extremes of elaboration? Here, extremes of elaboration, again, elaboration refers to conceptually or mentally elaborating things as if they were real, or there's another way of reading that as like dualistic elaborations, conceptual elaborations that are superimposed upon things. Since one can certainly put an end to them, one will attain liberation.
Oh yeah. 别那在那个社区机制是中山主办啊，他们的社区机制的，俺那是嘛不中女说伢呢，中山的讨论行动，开完旅乐园的没把团呢，俺那差别多少少。
The example that's given for this is that there was a man named Chanaka. He made a little bit of gold with an alchemical elixir that produces gold, transforms base metal into gold. And once he had done that, he knew that he could make a lot of gold in this way, so he threw away the small piece that he had initially made. On hearing that the body lacks good qualities, the wise also ought to discard attachment to it.
Oh yeah, that did it. That somebody has it. Someone in them job. Give us a Thomas Mejan, Sabbath Tayoba, Jenny. Takazan, Tommy Tam Mejan, Tamet Tayo, Chikasan, Shua Martina, Tena Sungo, but that. Chita Sabe Tatong Sing. Tell a Thomas Yumita, Sabe Yumita, teaching Julian Maza, give us one Minjuro. they can sorry. Chita Sabe Tatong Sing said, Thomas may between us should be Jimmy Juna, Chita Tayaba Judas. That the Yanda Yua Maris. 가서 시원나 연다 연나 안에 탐 저와 탐보대라 아니 계제기 주 메고 그래 아니 계제 저와 탐보 탐마기 안에 저와대라 아니 야나 주메래 중고래 야나 미디미디래 중화래 내 마대와 이다 미디미디당 아니 주메래 중화 매외이자 아니 탐에 탐매 세지 신고래자 탐마 메비 트네시비 띠위기나 치다타야바 주체세 지단 내라 소위 사베 메스바나 어디 사베 내가 소위 사베 메스바나 메스발에 타 통신시这个是给了他们明白，他们也把明白太大了。提醒都人比多几，看啥个当成300-800，看啥个当成300-800，就看啥个当成300一张，来不及往个9月，按你2年碰不点300一张，看啥的当成300-800，按你400-9月就马上为7日，按你2年400样900样就往民主了。
The next point is then given in verse 200, where it says that that although it is the case that there's no beginning to birth in the sense of taking conception within existence, nevertheless, there is one can illustrate that there is can be an end to this, which is the extinction of that kind of the exhaustion of that process of rebirth, taking conception within existence. That can be illustrated. And then the verse, or someone might say, well, when the continuity of birth, which has been engaged in beginninglessly, there's no beginning to it, how could there possibly be an end to it? One might say that. And the answer to that is, just as a seed, we see an end to a seed, even though it doesn't have a beginning, then similarly, when the conditions, when the causes that give rise to something are not complete, then birth as well will not occur. Is what the verse, how the verse reads. So here, as this is saying again what has been touched on previously, that the beginning of rebirth within samsara, there's no beginning to it. If there was an initial first time one is born in samsara, then that initial birth would have to have come about either without any cause whatsoever, or it would have had to have occurred due to some kind of causes that are incompatible with the process of taking rebirth within samsara. So that being the case, we can infer that there cannot be an initial point at which the process of samsara, taking rebirth within existence, started. No beginning to it. However, we can, on the other hand, say that there can be an end to it, that the end of samsara can be illustrated by means of an example. So if we take, for example, a grain of barley or other seeds like that, if they're burned in fire, then we see those seeds come to an end. Even though the continuity of causes and the process of producing those seeds was beginningless up to that point, there was no initial point at time, a first cause for the arising of that seed, the stream of causation that gave rise to it had no beginning at all. So, but the continuity of it can come to an end through like it being burned in fire. So, so just as the seed didn't have some kind of initial point at which the continuity of it began, similarly, by the force of an antidote, one can completely eliminate, totally get rid of the misapprehension of the self of persons. Here, by understanding the absence of a self of persons, one can come to which that functions as the antidote, which eliminates the misapprehension of a self of persons. And so by means of that, one is able to completely eliminate, totally taking rebirth in samsaric existence, because the causes which give rise to samsaric existence would then be incomplete. One of the causes of taking rebirth in samsara is the misapprehension of the self of persons. Therefore, one also would not, out of the force of karma and mental affliction, one would not, the rebirth within existence would not occur.
被这个三边团到也没把没事把你亲得痛，谢谢。他们觉得被这去哪里有的，等下被这考也没太嘛说，三边团到也没把没事把你亲得痛，三边啦，年纪三边团有一模一样，安尼看了汤面太阳嘛的是，但三边第一个汤嘛的看得进的穷啊的是呐，安尼汤面太阳嘛的是，但三边的没事把人呐，事把人呐，安尼对起码就把个牛把的叫把人上，安尼三边的个亲得痛啊人上，第二其他三边他说的太了汤嘛原没带的啥的，这是嘛明白他痛心啥的，亲得痛啊，汤没他没吧。我第四啥件年龄级碰波天，年龄级碰波天啊，大妹汤呗，亲得痛是大妹我什么都多是用光呗，安尼啥件年龄级碰波设备设备的主角人上，安尼大妹汤呗亲得痛，设备汤到越明白，没事把你亲得痛，第四刚才他这年龄第四刚才年龄上大妹汤呗亲得痛，大妹我什么汤呗，安尼亲得痛个的是
So then, again, there's another text. I don't exactly remember what it was, but where the same thing is said. Where, like, if you take the example of a seed, that seed of barley or whatever, there was a stream of causation that gave rise to that thing. It arose out of previous causes and conditions, prior seeds or prior plants, and those things. If you try to track back to the very, very beginning of that stream of causality, there is no initial point in time at which that stream of causation started. And we can establish that logically because first cause is incoherent. And so, however, one can nevertheless say that the continuity of that stream of causation can come to an end in that the seed, if you burn that seed, then it won't produce a subsequent plant and more seeds coming out of that. So that particular stream of causation would come to an end at that time. So just like that, the continuity of the contaminated aggregates which have been taken up through the force of karma and mental affliction are the stream of causality that gives rise to them has no initial point in time, no first point. That's beginningless, but one can nevertheless say that there can be an end to that stream of causation because for the contaminated aggregates to arise, they have to one of the conditions or causes that is necessary for their arising is misapprehension of the self. The misapprehension of the self is a necessary condition for the contaminated aggregates to arise, as we've seen in the dependent origination, the initial ignorance which gives rise to the rest of the samsara. So that continuity, if you eliminate that primary cause, the misapprehension of the self, then the continuity of that stream of the contaminated aggregates can be brought to an end. Here, one has to specify that it's not simple understanding of the absence of a real self or the selflessness of the person, but rather that one has to realize this directly through direct perception.
Oh yeah, that then a penna, mammy can't say bad. Any can't say bag, any mammy she was not she Jenny. Oh, taking us Jenny, Julian, you say bad. Any Jew Sajan Pumbo Sabak Tayo, that they became very.
Example that's given for the way in which the stream of the contaminated aggregates can cease is just like a butter lamp, which oil lamp or butter lamp. If the conditions which allow that lamp, that flame, to burn are extinguished, they're exhausted, then the flame of the lamp doesn't arise anymore.
Oh yeah. 路边上就讲起，做东北是没就对东啊啥些呗，有人去年毛把康，天天吵得蛮吵，是，俺那做他们家东北人，我什么都是没几年， 스미지 있어와 아니 시바라 때나 나는 뭐 양다고 소요 산제주 공방 안에 토바자 찬주선발잖아 그거라 지금 이게 아니 저 동아지 나와라 미세비 이제 준비 자원도 성외 아니 저기 동아 사셰배 아니 이뭐 아니 삼신도 아니 가서래 코리 껴발라네 아니 삼자지 텐자바데 대박이 아니 저바테네 초토매데 총아리 천년님 이런 천년님 봐서는 타마와 량유지 왕게 껴와 나신 전에 아니 삼신도 아니 가서로 코리 껴와 시네 아니 제사지 삼자지 텐자베 껴바테니 아니 저바 초토매데 총아리 숨긴들다
So then next there's a verse from Master Buddha Palita, which further illustrates this. And Master Buddha Palita said, through seeing, it says transmigrators, it could be the world or the world of living beings, beings that are migrating through samsara, as empty, since you wish to remove their suffering, you have toiled for a long time. This is most amazing. This is the most supremely amazing thing. One could actually apply this to Buddhas, unexcelled, true, perfectly awakened Buddhas as well. But here it's being talked about in terms of the marvelous deeds of the bodhisattvas. They are concerned with the welfare of migrating beings for the sake of sentient beings. They, even though they see that transmigrating beings do not exist by means of their own intrinsic nature, they see these migrating, moving beings as not possessing any kind of intrinsic existence, but nevertheless, out of their compassion for them, for their sake, they apply themselves and engage in all kinds of difficult activities, and that is most amazing. And then it says at the end, therefore, oneself ought to emulate them, should do as they do.
Oh yeah, yeah, there is no. Dora, she gave me about Tonya, some judge turn like Joey, Chanjusen be Jabani, and a chop metal chunwe. So there's a Chanjusen be Jabani, metal chunwe, Ranija, and it has a Chanjusen but that Jesus like Gures.
So then again, it says, although these bodhisattvas see the migrating beings in the world as not having any kind of intrinsic nature, they see them as devoid of an intrinsic nature. Nevertheless, for the sake of the sentient beings, they apply themselves to the bodhisattva activities, and thus these sons and daughters of the Buddha are their activities are the most amazing thing that one can encounter, because these activities are most supremely amazing. Then oneself ought to emulate or train oneself to follow after them, and that's in the same way.
Oh yeah, that is la. Leji kwamba leji lami kwamba choto jantera chibi dushe jechade. Then tada kwamba yi rani tije ne durunwa cha seo de gala dadini leji se gala sonanda miyowi leji gala tene ani la kasore ngondo sada miyo kwamba ani choto jang oh yeah, ani lewangi leji wangi ani kwara jara chibi. Oh, 저러 집이 메라 동아지라신 래 대유 고급 자원에 매바나 신체네. 미세시비 정가 라와로 리제 라와 매바 친체 봐서나 전에 저러 집이 아니 두시 제차대 슬라hin. 텐라위 가서래 전라 좀 좋아 쳐봐라. 아니 다 가르러 거기 자라라 줘봐라. 거기 주 아니 내가 님원이 디나네 님원 방고와 인사 아니 님원 본적이 아니 님보된 사무 동반이 도비 아니 동반 땡중 때를 배우고와 인사 저러 집이 또 실제자제 땡중 타자 광바 이세 광바라 때네 아니라니 투바 집에 나온 광바 근데 들어마시 영화 쇼 전에 돈이 광바 잠지 티진지라도 믿어봐 아니 장주기 선으로 장고와 인사 라니 티진에도 롱아차
So then there's a final verse, a summation, and here Master Gyaltsab says, I say, that even if one attains the supreme status of gods and men out of one's karma, please bless, or I ought to generate within myself the idea, see them as if they're imprisoned. And by conditioning myself, cultivating within myself meditation upon dependent origination free from extremes, may I myself become a suitable vessel for the Mahayana. So here the beings that, even if you attain the highest status as a god or a human being out of the two types of karma, here there's virtuous karma and then the unwavering type of karma that induces sentient beings compels them to be reborn as gods and humans. That is, they take that rebirth not out of their own control, but they're actually controlled by the karma that they're creating and are forced into these status of gods or humans. And so one ought to view these beings even in the upper realms, not to mention, of course, beings in the lower realms, as if they're have been inserted into a prison, and developing that understanding, knowing, seeing them as like prisoners. Then it says, I ought to make myself a suitable vessel to receive the Mahayana by conditioning myself to the meditation on dependent origination free from the extremes of existence and non-existence. And then implicit in this is also that one ought to develop within oneself not just the wisdom that understands dependent origination, but also the method side of the path, the development of generosity and so forth.
오야 다지 두이스스 저거 류찬다바 저저는 저 시저는 저 레버시는 볼래 너무 용서 좀 하시죠. 저도 제바 예비 저와 제 다랍 좀 구와 아들내랍 좀 구와.
Then there's the title. Ninth chapter.
단이와 전난데발라 땜베 남지는 샤바텔라 오래다 사모 전난데발라 땜베 삼일 남지는 바게라 샤바텔라 전난데바 게라 샤바당 라도 샤바잠베 고와 내가 사마방에 권에 로마단라 바베 공바단바 다도치세 나 전난데바 게와 샤바텔라야 땅고 가베 권에 된비치 가바당 오 된주 소소 가바당 뒤제지 천지 전내주소 라시지 주와 가바 다 될라야 땅고 가베 권에 된주 가바 질 가바라 나야 류이 숑샤바다 류이 천제샤바 당부 류이 숑샤바라야 땅고 가바 질 가바다 체라도 가바 된주 가바 밑에 비서바 다 땅고 질 가바 세티이사리 다들 망보시네 다 당부 땅고 질 가바니 땅을 지 가봐들라 우여당 两가봐 이외에 당분이 탐제제위 전제와 대나 다의 미태실 투바마도 지대의 지시셔봐 여마인 세대 다되게 되와 그래서 우리에서나 대다랍도 제방 아마 남지 세가라 라정 아마 남지 대관한이 도배 탑지 취 요외스 돈이 도와게 탑지 추 아니 야가다 가서를 따다 티지로 좀 세와라 소와게 아니 탑지 취 요외스 유샤네 대관한이 뒤지 때문에 내려온도钱네 다어 균내도 롱아钱네 유샤네 뒤장마 쇼라 송이나 돈이 들은 돈이 되버녀도 메론와게 안에 가진데 다 파사네 개코는 이제 맨내론도钱네 아니 다 라저 고만제지 디면제지 뒤제 겨와단 지바단 댐비 아니 라신이 주위 인보 중세자 매봐 아니 개와 셔봐 인
So next, in the beginning of chapter 9 here, or the ninth exposition, it has many subdivisions. The basic subdivision of the text here is these stages of the path, depending upon ultimate reality. And this has multiple subdivisions, an extensive explanation of ultimate reality, the purpose and necessity of composing this exposition here, and then a way in which one establishes oneself as the master, both the master and the disciple, by getting rid of the various kinds of objections that people might raise against this kind of instruction. There's a lot of different subdivisions here. We won't go through all of them. There, again, the outline is given in the appendix to the translation. But we arrive at, in terms of the extensive explanation of ultimate reality, there's a way in which we establish in general a rejection of the idea that things are established as real by way of negating the idea of a eternal or permanent functional thing, and then that's what this primary topic is that we've arrived at here. Within this chapter, there's an explanation of the title, the main body of the chapter, and an explanation of the chapter title. And so here first, in terms of the explanation of the main body of this chapter, there's three subdivisions. The rejection of a eternal thing in general. Here, thing refers to a functional thing, is something that's created by causes and conditions. Specific rejections of that, negations of that, and then there comes an argument later. We'll get to that later. So the first point here is the rejection of, in general, rejecting the notion of an eternal functional thing. Is two parts: the actual refutation of that, and then a refutation of someone who objects to that refutation that's initially given. So the first point is given in verse 201, and here the commentary introduces the topic by saying, by cleansing the mind stream with the flowing water of means by which to understand reality, the previous chapters have made it a vessel fit for the nectar of reality. The remaining chapters will explain how things which are created things, which arise and disintegrate, do not have even the slightest essence of intrinsic existence. And so here, again, to repeat that, the previous expositions or chapters have functioned like flowing water, which is the method to enable one to understand reality. And by means of that flowing water, one's mental continuum is cleansed and can be purified in that way, and make one into a suitable recipient or vessel for the nectar of the instruction on reality. And so then the remainder of the chapters that follow this show how it is that explain in detail how it is that things, created things, which possess arising and disintegration, they don't have any kind of essence which is established by means of its own intrinsic nature to any degree at all.
Oh yeah, 지대나 라와 레셔바 아니 가서를 라자게 텐도 nem비 텐도 아니 레라 베반에 제위 텐도 인지 탐제 제위 텐제와 세테만 지대나 라와 레셔바 아니 가서를 nem비 텐도 세가라 라자게 텐도 레라 베반에 제위 텐도 인지 코라랑게랑 심메바 주바다르 아니 장심메바 주바다르 시단한 그 탐제장这张跟我他们家车间都叫我买吧，让你几不现在没得把车间都叫我买吧，几日吧，俺那就操把它调过来，操把困难结行，结行，车间都叫我把操把困难结行。 초바 태양 편진 규단 제비 오른 내베스 gyula deobatan ane gyudan 제비 gyula tene gyewala sowa gyudan 제비 오 내베스 탐제 제비 tenjeba ane gyudan 제비 오 내바 내베 제비 tundu gyewa yenba yunzen ti chinas tenas ane dabadi ra시지 gyewa탕을 ra시지 gyewa me바탕 ra시지 gyewa탕 덴바탕 덴비 gyewa me바 제수지 인보탕 제수도 주바 그 인보 메바탕 아니 제수도 주비 인보탕 오여 바면 제수지 오여 바면 바 대실세 대나 따여 미 대실 아니 도자 제비 미로 요구선 투 아니 투바단 덴베 나 투바 점전된 야지 마도 아니 가서를 미다바당 동반이 기다려 오 말려봐 무슨도 투수 주바 셴매배 점전된 마도 아니 취해남지 내용 무슨도 주바 셴매배 매 대시셔봐 아니 셴 여바 많이 써야 되라 투바 마도 지대원 대시셔봐 여 많이 뭐야.
So then the verse here says, all are produced for their effect, thus none are permanent. Here, permanent also could entail eternal. The term underlying this, takpa or shashvata, can mean eternal also. There are no tathagatas other than the sages, munis, who know things as they are. In the world, it is accepted that when a laborer works hard for his wage, it is for the result and not because it is his nature to do so. Nature here is a play on intrinsic nature or nature to do so. The laborer doesn't work just for the sake of work, but does so in order to get the wage. Similarly, all external and internal things here, this is referring to function. She's calling it functional phenomena here. This is created things that are created by causes and conditions, do not arise of their own accord. Since they are produced solely through a multifarious aggregation of factors consisting of interrelated causes and effects, functional things or created things are produced for their effects. They arise as effects. They therefore are not permanent or eternal. They're not intrinsically produced arising from their own intrinsic nature, or truly existent, or they're not real as they appear. They do not have an essence which is able to sustain analysis, nor do they exist as things in and of themselves. They don't exist as functional things in and of themselves. Only the sages, munis, because they have the ability of perfected body, speech, and mind, directly know impermanence, emptiness, and all things without exceptions as they are. Since no one else does, there are no other tathagatas.
Oh yeah, 가서다 기시셔봐 샹여봐 마이노 양나 아니 때문에 강제위 체전 대다 아니 되면서 와라 지금만 가비 체전데 아니 제비 겐게와라 때네 아니 가와 제비 그진이 와는 가와 아니 시와 주바나 제비 겐게 가시고 시 때문에 제와는 집이 텐도 제와데 아니 집이 텐도 임비체 아니 원이 내가 요 말에 제와 원이 내가 요 말에 메서 제와 원이 내가 메도.
So, moreover, the teacher, Lord Buddha said, whatever arises inevitably ceases, for aging and death are conditioned by birth. Thus, since production or the arising of things is for the sake of their disintegration, nothing endures by way of its own character,
Oh, yeah. 다 가지기 따바다 내루 고반에 란주지 댄지 고반이 란주지 댄지 고반에 미대와 저와 셔데스 그냥 아니 가서래 그냥 최전 요구다고 자위 무슨 참아 아니 무슨 참아데 참아 송라 tumde shabi tumowa meba yindi ese 따고 기니나 중대샵이 최전라 채만 줘줘 아니 티나와 매봐 란전지 주비 가서래 최전라 차와 최전라 줘와 채만 줘와다 랑 천지지 모두 최전라 줘와 근데 이제 이네 중대샵이 아니 티나와 매봐 인데 탄주와 마도 탄주와다 아니다 란주바 만제라 아니 최전 티나와 요 말이 최전라 참아도 되나와 요 말이 가르레서나 란주바 만제게 최전들라 참아를 쏘와나 란그 천지지 아니 주비 최전라 참아 쏘와도와 탄주와 그 최전들라 참아를 쏘와나 란그 천지지 모두 최전라 참아를 쏘와도 고와 인자 대니라 아니 최전 티나와 매봤은 거다 탄주와 마도 누구랑 그 천지지 주와라 참아 쏘와도라 서란주바 만제게 탄주와니 아니 대미스 미스바 되바 이노 랑그 천지지 주비 최전라 참아 쏘와 매되바 이노
So then some, when they are engaging in a refutation of things being permanent or eternal or being established as real, when they do that, they they reject these things by means of an autonomous reason. And that's not acceptable, as it's explained in the commentary, that is Master Chandrakirti's commentary. And the reason for that is that here the subject of the reasoning which is being employed to reject something being eternal or being established as real. For example, take a sprout as a subject. There's a perceptual valid cognition of that, which perceptual valid cognition of something like a sprout. For the other schools of Buddhist philosophy apart from Prasangika, that actually is valid cognition in and of itself. It constitutes a valid cognition in an autonomous fashion. And for those philosophers, then, this is not something, a commonly appearing subject, which is merely established through the force of philosophy. It's not like that. But so except for the Prasangika, within the Prasangika school, something like a sprout is established by means of its own intrinsic identity, and they accept that establishment by means of its own intrinsic identity is sufficient valid cognition to establish a component in a syllogistic reasoning. But that for the Prasangikas, since something being like a sprout being established by means of its own intrinsic identity is impossible, then Prasangikas don't accept that there is a commonly appearing subject that's suitable to employ in some kind of autonomous syllogism employed when one's rejecting something like impermanence or things being established as real.
Oh yeah, 아니 랑기 샤제냐 좀 미니베 또바다 또메지 참아 강이 이제 참아 손사 너유다 현유 랑자는 만주 받고 전에 달래셔니 뭐를 손 나시 여버여나 랑기 천이 여버 동간기 루데라 여버간 랑기 용어 되버이나 랑자 나와라 되게 추워 손나 아니 랑기 샤자 수다라 소바데냐 좀 미니베 인장 아니 또바다 또메지 참아 간대지 인장 참아 손사 방어유나 너유랑자는 만주 받아 영어이나 아니 현유랑 자나 마주바지 고그래 전에다 대인바래.
So then this is explained likewise in the Essence of Good Explanations, how the difference between the Prasangika and the other schools of Buddhist philosophy is that things which appear to us in our cognitions, and even in valid cognitions, there's a degree of error that exists within them. From the Prasangika perspective, things appear as if they exist by means of their own intrinsic intrinsic identity, but that portion of the appearance of the thing is itself false, because things don't exist by means of their own intrinsic identity. So that being the case, then one's unable to employ any kind of thing appearing when one's engaged in a kind of an analytical investigation of the ultimate status of things. Since things don't exist by means of their own intrinsic identity, one's unable to adduce some kind of appearance of a thing that would be acceptable in common to the prasangika and a realist who assumes that things exist by means of their own intrinsic identity. One can't produce a subject that would be suitable for discussion within any kind of like a conversation about the ultimate nature of things, because for the prasangikas, that portion of the appearance of the thing existing by means of its own intrinsic identity is false, and so that as far as that's concerned, then that cognition is not valid. It's not knowing the thing correctly, and thus that comes down to the basic reason why within the prasangika school, one can't begin by adducing some kind of some syllogism that's acceptable to both the proponent and the opponent within an analysis of the ultimate nature of things, because the opponent naively assumes that things exist by means of their own intrinsic identity when in fact for the prasangika they don't.
Oh yeah. Tati len gaba tela kashi kana namdo yang madembani yuni mi tena namya kashi tu taba kayang yoma yin segan da chera bagi ani dewi tende jewa na taba miang du dewi tende jewa na taba miang o kanda jeje ji yan la ni ga ma sang wa jeje ge ni ga yan la ma sang wa ani nanga ne yi ji ta tu ba tang 이지파 난가냐 이지파 도바당 제제 인양 제제 매배 아니 두차로 참모 참했다고 아니 두차라나 따바따바 좋아 있는 세나 야 근데 대체나 아세 가시 가나 남도 양서 오 가시 유 가나 양 뒤 남지 차 유 가나 양 뒤 남지 차 아니 편지 맞대 봐 아니 뒤에 좀 오이나 아니 뒤나 맞대 봐 대마인 바게 아니 랑기 샤샤라 맞대 봐 라도라 맞대 봐 도라 맞대 봐네 대다 여 봐니 니비 고가 매배 마덴바니原因是啊고가 매배 대나 나면 요 가시도我大把干样要把많이 넣어 윤전 대나 뒤에 나면 요 가시도我大把干样要把많이 넣어
So next comes the rejection of the response to that, which here it is saying that here is presenting the assertion of Vaisheshika, the Vaisheshika school, non-Buddhist school of philosophy. It says that although things that are produced for their effect are not permanent, functional things from things that are created from space to mind, which lack both the feature of being produced and that of being producers, and the smallest particles, which, though they are producers, are not produced, are permanent and real, or you could say eternal and real, because within that school these things in those categories are considered to be eternal and real. And the reply to that is given in verse 202. There is not anywhere anything that ever exists, it says, without depending, or one could translate that also as without depending on something else. Thus, never is there anywhere anything that is permanent or eternal. Here, referring to functional things. There's no such thing as a functional thing or a created thing that is permanent or eternal.
Oh yeah.
Never at any time or in any place is there any chance of finding a functional thing, a created thing, that does not depend upon Shia's relatedness here, or one could translate that as contingency, being contingent? Thus, never is there anywhere a permanent functional thing, or a thing that's created by causes and conditions in that way, which is permanent or eternal. Since whatever exists only exists dependently, it does not have even the slightest existence by means of its own intrinsic character, or own entities, which she has an intrinsic character.
Oh, yeah. That did tell them. Contestation. You have a chingy, then you have a corner invest. You have a Chinjana, Rangi Chasha to my dual attendant, and the Chasha to my trouble at dinner. You have a corner imbe. Chasha to my dual at dinner. You have a imbe. And it's Shenla Ram Maleba, Rang Chasha Shenla Ra Leba, in the Shenla Ram Maleba.
So then we can say that just to the extent that something exists, particularly a created or thing, or something that's produced by causes and conditions, its existence is strictly contingent. One can look at it from the point of view of wholes and parts. If it's a whole, then it necessarily depends upon it's contingent upon its parts, or even a part is contingent upon a whole. And then, or if one is speaking in terms of causality, something that arises due to causes and conditions is strictly, its existence is strictly contingent upon the causes and conditions that give rise to it. It only exists contingently upon its causes and conditions. And that because that is strictly the case, there's nothing at all which is established by means of its own intrinsic character. Here, intrinsic character would refer to some kind of a character which is autonomous, not relying upon something other outside of the thing itself.
Ani jume ba yung obo me guda ta ba yeme ba tena jume le chumni ti chembe chuma mi chumi sung se ode ta de ga sung re se jume ba ne obo yang se ka de dewa la so wi ani tenjin dewa chungwa ni yue la se dewa la so wa so dewa de tanyen sung ga dewa la so wi tenjin dewa chungwa ni yue la Nani did I get to a Juyin Bay, Yelas, and that here, Annie Tabare, Silicana, Dani Taba Yino Shenas. That de la that's a Casatana, Maimba Casatana, Cogumbadita, Corantua, Anitella. Kasagata yoba member ta Kasagata yoba member ta Sigana Jume by over me Ranki Kibi Guti Mebani over Melas over Melach Gudan Dembi Taba yoba member teacher Gudan Dembagi Gudan Cheva Gudan Dembagi Taba yoba member teacher and a duel to be over any castle, T. Chamber Truba member soon, they say, cannot you may let to be T. Chamber to me soon.
So the next point is specific refutation or refutation of this notion of eternal functional or permanent functional things, permanent created things in detail. And here there's a rejection of the self of persons, and that's the first topic. And that has the actual rejection or refutation of a self of persons, and then there's a refutation of the response that the opponent here would give to that refutation. The first of these, the actual refutation, is without a cause, there is no there's no thing, functional thing. And just like the causes, its functional things are not permanent or eternal. Therefore, the omniscient one, or the one who knows reality, has said that something being established without a cause is not established. It can't be established. So the Buddha has said that something that is a functional thing being established without a cause that notion cannot be established. So someone might say, well, happiness, the sensation of pleasure and so forth, which are dependently originated, these exist, and the self is the cause which gives rise to, which collects these things to its, is the reason for these things being brought together, and therefore it exists, and that as well is eternal or permanent. So the opponent here, the Vaisheshika, for example, might say that. And so here the response to that is the self of persons is non-existent. The reason for that is that is because the So there is no functional thing at all without the cause which gives rise to it, the specific causes that generate that functional thing. And also, there's no such thing as an eternal thing, permanent thing, which possesses a cause. So that's the reason which establishes the non-existence of the self of persons as it's construed or imagined by the Vaisheshikas and so forth. And a thing which is established without a cause is not established by those who know reality. So thus, there's a verse, or two lines of a verse, which explain this as well, where it says that phenomena which have causes and which have conditions are known to exist. But any kind of nature which is without cause or without condition doesn't exist. Here in the translation it says phenomena in the second line, but the text as we've got it reading here anyway says chunyi, which is dharmata, some kind of nature, the basic nature of things. If it reads like that, then a basic nature of things which is without causes and without conditions is non-existent.
미다 제와 통주네 마제 가제 따나니 제라 여바 니 통네 아니 가서래 따바니 유니 멤버 주로 보세 가제 분바당 대화라서와 미다바 제와 아니 미다바 제와 통화 주나서 까지 집에 미다바 제와도 통화 주나 세라 미다 제와 통주네 세세 아니 통주네 통주 코에 나라서와 마제바 가데 따버케 레나니 나라서와 규정이 마셔봐 가데 따바开레나니 분발로서의 저와 여반이 통내 때 아니 통위치 나라서와 따바니 여반 민주와 타로 따바니 여반 민주와 타로서 분발로서와 저와 여반이 통내 대통위치 규정이 나라서와 따바 여반이 따바니 아니 민주와 타로서
So then the next is a rejection of the reply to that, and this is given in verse 204. If unproduced is permanent, because impermanent things are seen to be products, seeing that the produced exist would make the permanent non-existent. So that's the verse, and then it says here, if on seeing that a pot and pleasure, a sensation of happiness or pleasure and so forth, are impermanent and produced, one asserts that the self and so forth are by implication permanent, it would follow that because of seeing that a pot and so forth are produced and exist, whatever is permanent like the self would be non-existent, as a flower, a sky flower. No.
분발로서의 저와여바 통내니 통내디 통위치 나라서와 따와여바 민바 주와타 빼나는 게 매도신세.
The example that's given there is like a sky flower. It's an example of a completely non-existent thing to illustrate the idea of a permanent self, the existence of a permanent self or eternal self.
Yeah, that didn't do much as Nangata, Gobani, and you can tell quite that.
So we'll stop there for today.
Sashi Dagi chaktan
Muzo
we John